8. Isabel Quintero. In May 2022, police officers in Albuquerque, New Mexico responded to a call about a car parked in the middle of a highway ramp. Body cam footage showed a deputy approaching the vehicle in question, where a young woman seemed to be passed out behind the wheel with her windshield wipers still on and all of the doors locked. Officers pounded on the window as the woman slowly woke up. She was almost completely incoherent as she struggled to answer basic questions and needed assistance getting out of her car. The woman eventually identified herself as 21-year-old Isabel Quintero. At first, she denied drinking any alcohol when asked by an officer, who pointed out that she literally had a bottle of booze in her hand when police approached her car. When Isabel noticed a cop looking inside her vehicle, she started telling him that he didn't have permission to search. She even responded with a hard no when another officer asked if she'd undergo a field sobriety test. While being led away in handcuffs, she also told an officer repeatedly to shut the F up. Aware that the young woman wasn't exactly in her right mind, the officers displayed remarkable patience and professionalism as they helped her into their vehicle, put her seatbelt on, and drove her to the police station. Throughout the rest of the booking process, she was clearly spacing out in her own world. At one point, she repeatedly said that she was having fun. She also talked about how hot she thought the cops were, and she asked for a lawyer twice before telling the officers how funny she thought they all were and laughing like a mad woman. One thing Quintero was consistent about was her refusal to take a breathalyzer test. She was put in the drunk tank, where she continued talking to herself and laughing loudly. Not long after, she was charged with aggravated DWI and battery on a police officer. Records show that she was released while she squared away her legal issues in court. 7. Michelle Salentine. 28-year-old Michelle Salentine was in her 6th year of service in the Platteville, Wisconsin police force when an informant claimed she was a regular crack user and that she'd even used the drug while on the job. Her superiors were shocked since there had been no previous issues with Salentine. The informant contacted the FBI back in 2010 and said that they saw Salentine smoke crack at least 6 times, including when she was in uniform and carrying her service weapon. Throughout the investigation, the tipster updated law enforcement on Salentine's alleged drug use, which included 2 occasions where she used crack in the middle of the night before going back on duty. The wayward officer was also recorded using drugs in audio footage captured by the informant through a wire. During a search of Salentine's home, FBI agents found several suspected marijuana and crack pipes, as well as evidence of drug residue. Salentine admitted during questioning that she had been using crack for about a year. By then, it had gone from being a recreational habit to something she relied on to deal with her life problems. At least 2 people, including someone she lived with, said that they saw the cops' drug use firsthand. Salentine pleaded guilty to maintaining a crack house and served a year and 1 day in federal prison. As you've probably already guessed, she's no longer on the force. 6. Diamond Golden. On what started off as a normal Saturday afternoon in early June 2023, over 500 people attended a pop-up party thrown at a park in Lake Butler, Florida. According to police, a 23-year-old Gainesville woman named Diamond Golden used Facebook to spread the word about the gathering. Guests came in droves at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Members of the normally quiet community were shocked as the partygoers descended upon the peaceful park and filled nearby streets. Union County Sheriff's deputies saw a lot of people drinking and doing drugs as they tried to break up the disruptive event. They ended up using chemical agents to disperse the crowd, and at one point shots were even fired. Some partygoers later claimed that police officers shot into the crowd, but an agency spokesperson denied the allegation. Several people were arrested that day, including a young man who was accused of shooting another guest. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured. Golden is accused of trying to cover up her role in planning the party by deleting crucial evidence from her phone. She allegedly has a history of being involved in similar events. Determined to stop the parties from continuing, authorities charged her with inciting or encouraging a riot. When the story broke headlines, the sheriff's office announced that Golden would be held on a $50,000 bond. Her case seems to be ongoing. 5. Olivia Lake. In January 2015, a lawyer from Poway, California named Jeffrey Lake and his wife Jackie Lake threw a Playboy-themed 18th birthday party for their young daughter Olivia. 200 people showed up to the bash, which was dubbed Liv's Playboy Mansion, including 150 guests who were under the legal drinking age. This didn't stop anyone from drinking though, since there was plenty of booze. An array of racy photos that were taken at the bash even popped up on social media throughout the night. But the fun ended when San Diego County deputies showed up responding to a noise complaint. According to a police report, deputies observed underage drinkers carrying alcoholic beverages outside the home. Inside the property, they found 2 unconscious partygoers. Law enforcement quickly broke up the gathering, and Jeff Lake was charged with violating the city's social host ordinance, which bans residents from hosting events for underage drinkers. He was also accused of acting argumentative toward deputies at the scene, and he initially claimed that he had done nothing wrong. Lake ultimately took a deal and pleaded guilty to a reduced infraction charge. In other words, it was more or less a violation at the same level of a traffic ticket. Had Lake been convicted of his original charge, he could have faced 6 months in jail and a fine of $1,000. Instead, he avoided jail time entirely and paid a measly $125 fine. 4. Macy Regan and Dixie Styles. It's normal for parties to spiral out of control on the 4th of July, so sheriff's deputies in Bay County, Florida weren't too surprised when they were called to a home in Callaway in response to an assault and battery. According to a police report, a fight broke out at the party between a few men. Shortly after, 23-year-old Macy Regan tried leaving the party and returning to her home next door. She was then confronted by 18-year-old Dixie Styles, who reportedly accused her of stealing both alcohol and vape pens. Regan allegedly pulled a 9mm handgun from her waistband out for protection, and Styles knocked it out of her hand. The 2 women fought, and Regan was accused of biting off the top of Styles' ear during the fight. Doctors were unable to reattach the top of Dixie's ear, and both women received multiple bruises and lacerations. Regan was later charged with felony battery causing bodily harm, while Styles was hit with a battery charge. Their cases are still ongoing. 3. Vera McCooley. Controversial party behavior is nothing new for the NYPD, and the 2021 holiday season was no exception. During one precinct's holiday party at a bar that year, a 26-year-old rookie cop named Vera McCooley gave a lap dance to her boss, Lieutenant Nick McGarry. Viral footage showed McCooley grinding on McGarry's lap in front of a crowd of onlookers. Some customers who witnessed the display were fine with it, including one person who pointed out that this is the type of thing that goes on at holiday cop parties. Other patrons were disgusted, telling reporters that it wasn't exactly something they wanted to look at while they were having dinner with their families. It didn't take long for McCooley and McGarry to realize that they'd messed up. Their higher-ups were furious about the incident and the viral clip. Also, McGarry was married, and his wife was not happy. When asked about the story, the wife lost her temper and had to be restrained from attacking a reporter. And who can blame her? A police source told the New York Post that as a rookie, McCooley was essentially less culpable than McGarry, who should have set an example for less experienced officers. After the footage circulated, he was reassigned to a transit division. McCooley, who was not disciplined, told the Post that a co-worker dared her to give McGarry a lap dance. Being the natural life of the party, as she described herself, she lacked the foresight to predict the ways the situation could go wrong. The young woman apologized for what she did, clarifying that she didn't know McGarry was married when it happened and that she hoped it didn't cause damage to the couple's marriage. She also expressed remorse for the impact the ordeal had on McGarry's career, which basically relegated him to the rank of a subway cop. McCooley went on to say that she didn't think she would have faced such harsh judgment if she'd been a man putting the moves on someone. She speculated that the incident would have been taken more as a joke and less as a scandal. But those weren't the circumstances, and it was arguably a moot point to think about the what-ifs of the situation. 2. Peaches. In 2008, police officers responded to a noise complaint from a duplex in Washington, D.C. There was a house party happening inside with a makeshift strip club, complete with underwear-clad women who were dancing for tips. Some partygoers initially claimed that it was just a birthday party. Others said that there was a bachelor party, but nobody could identify who the supposed guest of honor even was. Police also couldn't find the host, who some people identified as a woman that they only knew as Peaches. After failing to get to the bottom of the situation, the cops concluded that the home was abandoned and that the guests had not been legally invited there. They arrested 21 partygoers for unlawful entry. People claim they had permission to be at the event, but there was no way to confirm it without knowing who Peaches was or where to even find her. 16 defendants even sued the force, arguing that they had been unlawfully arrested that night. The charges were later reduced and then dropped entirely, but the lawsuit went back and forth for years in the court system. Judges initially ruled in favor of the partygoers and awarded them a whopping $680,000. The ruling was upheld by the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, but the officers appealed the case all the way to the Supreme Court, which reversed the decision and actually ruled in favor of the police. Meanwhile, Peach's identity remained hidden even in legal documents, which did not identify the woman's true name. Finally, in 2017, almost a decade after the party, and during the ongoing court battle, Peaches was publicly identified as a woman named Veronica Little. She worked as a bartender and was known for organizing private birthday and bachelor parties. She was extremely well-liked among almost everyone who knew her, and in an era before you could place an order for anything online, her connections proved invaluable for those looking to throw a massive get-together. The lawyer representing the plaintiffs who sued the police tried getting Peaches to cooperate in the court case, but she wanted nothing to do with the situation. Sadly, she passed away from respiratory complications in 2016 at only 50 years old. 1. Rebecca Warren. On the evening after Christmas in 2019, police in Auburn Hills, Michigan responded to several calls about a Jeep weaving between traffic lanes and sideswiping a guardrail along an interstate. Behind the wheel was 48-year-old State Representative Rebecca Warren, who told officers that she was heading home to Ann Arbor after an event in Detroit. It was strange that Warren was traveling on Interstate 75, which doesn't serve as a direct link between the two cities, but she didn't seem in her right mind at all that night. She performed poorly on a field sobriety test and even admitted to drinking 2 or 3 glasses of wine, but she refused to take a breathalyzer test. In dashcam footage of the traffic stop, Warren was heard saying, "I'm elected, I'm a senator. This is going to be the most famous arrest you've ever made." After being put in the back of a squad car, the politician could be heard talking about how the arrest could ruin her life. She expressed a fear that she wouldn't get a chance to fix her career after the story broke. A blood sample was eventually taken after police obtained a warrant, revealing a blood alcohol level of 0.21, over 2.5 times the legal limit. Under Michigan law, it qualified Warren as super drunk. The incident wasn't as life-ruining as she expected it to be. Almost immediately after being released on bond pending the outcome of her case, Warren issued a mea culpa on social media. She admitted to drunk driving, commended the police for handling the situation professionally, and apologized for her poor decisions. Warren remained vocally apologetic over the next few months while she sorted the case out, until she finally reached a point where she decided that she had done everything possible to show that her remorse was authentic. She pleaded guilty to a reduced misdemeanor DUI charge and was sentenced to a year of probation and 10 days of community service. Later that year, she decided against re-election. #18. Chloe Haynes. One of the most noteworthy pre-COVID mid-flight meltdowns to make news headlines occurred on a Jet2 plane while en route from London to Turkey in 2019. 26-year-old Chloe Haynes was traveling with her wheelchair-bound grandmother and taking swigs out of a bottle of gin tucked into her carry-on when she became disruptively drunk. It started with the young woman simply being unsteady on her feet and slurring her words, but the situation eventually devolved into a full-blown fit of rage which led to her screaming, crying, singing, and trying to open the emergency exit while threatening to kill everyone on the plane. As cabin crew members and passengers rushed to stop Chloe from opening the door, the pilot turned the plane around and headed back to England. In the meantime, 2 Royal Air Force fighter jets were dispatched to intercept the plane. Jet 2 fined Haynes £85,000 and imposed a lifetime ban on flying with the airline. She was also hit with criminal charges and ended up pleading guilty to assault by beating and endangering the safety of an aircraft. The troubled woman wept as the judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison. It seems like Haynes was in a downward spiral because just 17 days before the in-flight tantrum, she had been convicted of drunk driving. These incidents pointed toward a deeper problem regarding the role alcohol played in her life at the time. Thankfully, she started attending AA meetings after the outburst and expressed deep remorse for her behavior at her sentencing, indicating that she had the capability of getting her life on track if she wanted to. 17. Kathy Lukes. During what was supposed to be a routine midday traffic stop in September 2023, a police officer in Palmer, Ohio, observed a car with expired plates driving 43 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. Behind the wheel was 66-year-old Kathy Lukes, who served as the mayor of nearby North Royalton from 1999 to 2007. Lukes allegedly acted uncooperative from the get-go and refused to obey the officer's commands. In body cam footage of the conversation, she acted noticeably disorientated and confused. As she responded no to the officer's questions about whether she had her license with her or if she could put her car in park, Lukes rolled up the window and hit the gas. She led police on a brief high-speed chase, which ended when her vehicle jumped a curb and crashed into a tow truck. After being pulled out of her car and handcuffed at the scene, Lukes refused to get into a police cruiser. The ex-politician kept asking for her stuff and said, "What you're doing is wrong. Let me tell you how it works." And of course, she made sure to remind the officers that she was the former North Royalton mayor. Lukes was charged with operation while intoxicated, speeding, having an open container of alcohol in a vehicle, and driving with expired plates. She pleaded not guilty and was released on a $5,000 bond, with instructions to return to court at a later date. 16. Aaron Gregory. In an emergency call that would be considered unusual almost anywhere other than Florida, 911 dispatchers in Brevard County received a report about a drunk man riding a Walmart scooter one morning in July of 2023. Responding deputies arrived at the store in Melbourne to find a disorientated man, later identified as 39-year-old Aaron Gregory, swerving around as he attempted to drive one of the store's motorized buggies. A loss prevention worker reportedly told law enforcement that Gregory was driving into shelves and displays and almost hitting other customers as he zoomed around the store haphazardly. According to a police report, the suspect was so drunk that he could barely stand without assistance and needed to be removed from the store on a stretcher. In the scooter's basket, deputies found Gregory's backpack, which contained a bottle of Smirnoff vodka. In the report, the responding officer noted that he'd observed Gregory swaying with glassy eyes and a distinct odor of alcohol on his breath. The cop wrote that he tried interacting with Gregory, but he was so intoxicated that he was unable to answer any questions. When the officer asked for the suspect's ID, he appeared to reach for his wallet, but he was unable to actually dig into his pocket. The report further stated that 2 officers had to help Gregory from the patrol car to the police station. Yet as drunk as he seemed, he was somehow aware enough of the situation to refuse a breathalyzer. The disruptive driver was charged with driving under the influence, which may seem silly since Walmart scooters have an average maximum speed of 10 miles per hour. But it's considered a motor vehicle under Florida law, and Gregory was therefore charged accordingly. He was also charged with misdemeanor counts of disorderly intoxication and possession of an open container of alcohol. 15. Margaret Barnes. After arriving in the seaside resort town of Barmouth in North Wales for a staycation in 2023, 71-year-old Margaret Barnes stopped to drink at a bar. She was there to visit friends and was looking forward to spending time together. But her vacation was unexpectedly cut short after she had too much to drink during her evening out and mistook a man's home for her bed and breakfast. Unaware that she was in the wrong building, Barnes entered a bedroom and went to sleep. The homeowner, 46-year-old David Redfern, was understandably shocked to arrive home with his partner and find the senior citizen snoozing away in his bed. But instead of trying to handle the situation rationally, he became aggressive. Redfern dragged Barnes downstairs by her feet and proceeded to physically assault the much smaller, much older woman, causing numerous internal injuries and broken ribs. He threw Barnes' luggage out into the street and cruelly mocked her as she ran after it and began complaining of chest pains. The elderly woman collapsed on the ground and became unconscious as she went into cardiac arrest. And sadly, Barnes died from her injuries despite Good Samaritan's efforts to save her. Redfern was charged with murder and manslaughter. During his trial, he argued that Barnes had charged at his partner and had struck her in self-defense. Meanwhile, the prosecution pointed out a conflicting story Redfern had previously given, in which he claimed to have accidentally tripped and fallen on the victim. The court also heard about how Redfern admittedly had anger issues, and the jury found him guilty of murder despite his claims of innocence. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 14 years. 14. Henry Mead. During the 2023 holiday season, 40-year-old Henry Mead picked up some extra work driving a children's train during the annual Christmas tractor parade in Tazewell. The so-called Santa's train was actually just a lawnmower disguised to look like a festive locomotive, with 2 cars attached for pulling passengers around. At some point during the event, people began to notice that Mead appeared unsteady on his feet, so suspecting that he was intoxicated, a police officer conducted a breathalyzer. The hunch proved correct, and the police also found methamphetamine, a syringe, and other narcotics in the suspect's possession. Mead's Saturday night temporary gig was cut short, and he was booked into the Clybourne County Jail on suspicion of driving under the influence, methamphetamine possession, and additional drug counts. In a statement announcing the arrest, the Tazewell Police Department made sure to mention that Mead hadn't been hired by the city for the train driving job, and that he was working through a private contractor when the incident occurred. 13. Tamara Louise Lorimer. Australian couple Tamara Louise Lorimer and Doreen Joan Lindsay were drinking heavily with their friends at their home in Broome in November 2021 when they received a call from a friend who needed some help. Lorimer and 3 others piled into a car and began backing out of the driveway right as Lindsay walked into the vehicle's path. Without meaning to, Lorimer reversed over her 35-year-old girlfriend, who died from her injuries, despite the best efforts of emergency responders to save her life. Police noted that Lorimer was intoxicated, causing them to question why she got behind the wheel in the first place, and they learned that Lindsay was also drunk at the time of the accident. A blood alcohol test showed Lorimer's level at 0.121, which is above the legal limit for driving. She was charged with manslaughter, but maintained her innocence in court, blaming the tragedy on the driveway's shape and a supposed blind spot. Based on Lorimer's claims, it would have been impossible for her to see Lindsay in her path no matter how drunk or sober she was. But the judge disagreed, describing the incident as a wasteful tragedy with no winners. Lorimer was found guilty of manslaughter and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 2026 after serving 3 years behind bars. 12. Efren Mencia Ramirez. While working routine patrol on a Saturday afternoon in March of 2019, a sheriff's deputy in Spartanburg County, South Carolina spotted a vehicle speeding, swerving, and weaving along an interstate. So he pulled the car over and quickly called for backup. When the backup deputy arrived, the cop who was already on the scene told him that both the driver and the passenger of the vehicle had been drinking beer. He further explained that when he approached the vehicle, he saw the driver, 49-year-old Efren Mencia Ramirez, spraying Axe body spray into his mouth in an attempt to mask the smell of alcohol. The suspicious motorist didn't have a valid driver's license, and there was a 12-pack of Corona on the passenger side floorboard. All but one of the beer bottles were open, nearly all of them were completely empty, and the passenger allegedly had an open beer resting between his legs. As it turned out, Axe body spray doesn't effectively cover up the smell of booze. After pulling Mencia Ramirez aside for a one-to-one chat, one of the deputies noticed the distinct odor of alcohol and that the suspect's eyes were glassy. Mencia Ramirez claimed he'd only drank one beer, but a language barrier prevented the conversation from going much further. As a result, he was charged with drunk driving, driving without a license, driving without insurance, and having an open container. 11. Eberson de Oliveira. In a horrifying confrontation that was captured on CCTV footage in early 2023, a Brazilian mother of one named Fabilis Felipe de Almeida could be seen approaching a drunk man and telling him to stop talking so loudly into his phone. The 37-year-old had reportedly just finished working for the day in the city of Fortaleza and was stopping to meet with friends for happy hour when she crossed paths with the disruptive fellow bar patron. The noisy man, 51-year-old Eberson de Oliveira, was drinking alcohol when Fabilis entered the bar. He then proceeded to stand right next to her as he continued to speak far louder than necessary. After telling Oliveira to quiet down and exchanging some heated words, Fabilis appeared to slap her adversary, who proceeded to plunge a knife into her chest. She managed to stay on her feet, while pools of blood formed quickly on the ground beneath her. Bystanders rushed over to help prop her up, and in the meantime, Oliveira cautiously backed away and then fled the scene on foot. Fabilis was rushed to the hospital, where she clung to life for 2 days before succumbing to her injuries. Police apprehended Oliveira 5 days after the stabbing and booked him into custody on a murder charge. Speaking with the press, Fabilis' 20-year-old daughter described her mother as extremely calm and patient, which only makes it even more curious that she saw fit to raise her voice at Oliveira that night. According to the most recent updates, the investigation is ongoing. 10. Jesse Mayer. In 2019, 56-year-old Rob Kristofowicz traveled from his home in East Aurora, New York, to North Reddington Beach, Florida, with his best friend Mark Nowak. The men were out on jet skis one afternoon when Nowak heard a loud crash behind him, coming from the same direction that Kristofowicz was riding in. A 37-foot boat had plowed into Kristofowicz at an estimated speed of over 70 miles per hour, killing him at the scene and leaving his body horribly maimed. The boat's operator, 35-year-old Jesse Mayer, was accused of being both drunk and reckless behind the wheel. Investigators observed several signs of intoxication, including bloodshot eyes, dilated pupils, the smell of alcohol on Mayer's breath, and a seemingly unsteady stance. According to court documents, his blood alcohol level tested much higher than the legal threshold for a boat captain and for driving a boat. Mayer was arrested on suspicion of BUI manslaughter, vessel homicide, reckless operation of a vehicle, and violation of navigation rules. But his defense team managed to stall the court proceedings for 4 years before the case finally went to trial in 2023. As many as 20 of Kristofowicz's friends and family members traveled to Pinellas County from Buffalo to attend the hearings, and Mayer's own daughter testified against him at his trial. The jury found Mayer guilty of vessel homicide, and he was sentenced to a little over 9 years in prison. At the hearing, his attorney requested a new trial, which the judge denied, and Mayer is now reportedly in the process of appealing his case. 9. Troy Maskell. 73-year-old Australian postmaster John Burke was just doing his job and providing service with a smile when he greeted a woman and her daughter at his post office in Strathmerton, Victoria in 2021. The woman took Burke's friendliness the wrong way and mentioned it to her boyfriend, 44-year-old Troy Maskell, who was drunk and high on marijuana at the time. Having consumed several beers and shots of Jack Daniels, he wasn't exactly in the right frame of mind when he picked up a 1-liter bottle of sports beverage and chunked it full force at Burke's head. The senior citizen fell onto the hard-tiled floor and lay helplessly as Maskell kicked him and stomped on his glasses. 11 weeks later, Burke passed away in the hospital due to blood clots in his brain. In 2023, Maskell was found guilty of manslaughter and was sentenced to 8 years behind bars, with the requirement to serve at least 5 in prison. Judge Lex Lasry acknowledged that the defendant felt genuinely remorseful for his actions, but he also admonished Maskell for the unprovoked attack, which the judge described as despicable and the kind of violence that society abhors. 8. Avinash Pawar. In a robbery gone wrong that went partially unsolved for 3 decades, a 55-year-old man and his 50-year-old wife were brutally killed during a home invasion in Lonavala, India in October 1993. 2 of the 3 suspects were quickly apprehended. Meanwhile, the third intruder, 19-year-old Avinash Pawar, managed to slip out of sight. He fled the area and moved to the city of Aurangabad, where he assumed the alias Amit Pawar. The fleeing fugitive then moved around between various locales and eventually ended up in Mumbai. Over the years, Pawar married and built an entirely new life based on his false identity. He put his past behind him, vowing to never look back, and he also got comfortable enough to not worry about getting caught. However, Pawar blew his own cover 30 years after the double murder, when he confessed to someone about the crime during a drinking session. The person tipped off the police, who promptly took the 49-year-old into custody to finally face justice for his actions. 7. Kimberly Gable. During a visit to a Red Lobster restaurant in St. Petersburg, Florida in 2018, 42-year-old Kimberly Gable got a little too rowdy for the atmosphere. The alleged drunk diner was asked to leave because she was disturbing customers who were trying to enjoy their Saturday afternoon lunch. According to an arrest affidavit, Gable began swearing as she headed toward the door, and as she huffed and puffed her way past a lobster tank, she allegedly reached in, grabbed a live one, and fled on foot with the crustacean in hand. Gable was still in the general area when a sheriff's deputy arrived at the scene in response to a call about the lobster theft. While speaking with the poorly behaved patron, the deputy noticed that her breath smelled strongly of alcohol and that her speech was slurred. And when asked about the stolen lobster, Gable said that she had no knowledge of the specimen's whereabouts. She went on to explain that she didn't know where the creature was because she was blacked out drunk, and that she didn't care because she didn't do anything wrong. Gable was charged with misdemeanor disorderly intoxication, making it the latest in a long list of priors which included theft, drug possession, open container, domestic battery, exposure of one's privates, drunk driving, and resisting an officer. 6. Richard Smith. Former South African police officer Richard Smith liked having his work-issued gun with him at all times. After being accused of assault twice, he was lucky he was still allowed to have the weapon, and even more fortunate he hadn't yet lost his job. When the Piketberg cop clocked out of work for a vacation in early 2022, he took the gun with him, even though it's customary for officers to turn their firearms in before taking a holiday. He then proceeded to spend an entire day drinking heavily at home, causing him to pass out for several hours. Smith also spent a large portion of the day harassing and stalking his girlfriend, Natasha Boyce, with an onslaught of text messages and phone calls, demanding to know her locations and movements. Boyce and her family were out sightseeing and photographing landmarks when the barrage of obsessive correspondence came flooding in. Wanting to focus on quality time with loved ones, Boyce told Smith that she would talk to him when she got home later that day. According to investigators, Smith sent so many messages and calls that he had to stop and buy more minutes for his phone. After doing so, he tracked Boyce down. A confrontation occurred between the two, and as Boyce tried to walk away, Smith pulled out his beloved gun and shot her in the back, killing her at the scene. He then went and parked outside the police station where he worked and spent several minutes thinking about his next move before ultimately deciding to continue drinking. It wasn't long before Smith was arrested for murder. In court, he argued that he was only stalking Boyce so closely that day because he was planning to cheat on her and wanted to ensure he wouldn't get caught. He didn't give much of an explanation for shooting Boyce other than, "I just shot. There was no reason." During Smith's trial, the judge questioned why he chose to carry his gun when he was so drunk, especially since doing so goes against the police department's policy. Smith essentially said that he wasn't really thinking about how something terrible might happen because it was a habit to always have the gun on him. The disgraced former cop was convicted of Boyce's murder and was sentenced to life in prison as a result. He also received a 3-year sentence for attempted murder for threatening to kill Boyce's cousin, 1 year for pointing a gun at the young woman, 3 years for using a gun while drunk, and 3 more years for driving drunk. 5. Shelton Begay. An infamous Arizona man named Shelton Begay first went viral in October 2018 when he made news headlines for catching a DUI charge on a bird scooter in Tempe. The 26-year-old's intoxicated joyride was brought to the attention of law enforcement after he crashed the scooter into a Dodge Dart. During her phone call to the police, the car's owner noted that Begay was swerving in the middle of the road and that he seemed drunk. And at one point, he fell off the scooter and took a spill onto the pavement. According to police, Begay's blood alcohol content was more than 3 times the legal limit at 0.285. Responding officers noticed signs of intoxication, including slurred speech, and Begay failed a series of field sobriety tests. When questioned about his alcohol consumption, he said that he consumed 2 cans of Bud Light. But his erratic scooter driving made the claim highly questionable, along with the stash of booze in his backpack, which included a 16-ounce beer and several mini bottles of banana-flavored liquor. In addition to the DUI count, Begay was charged with reckless driving, criminal damage, and other counts. His booze and scooter were also seized as evidence. Begay was in the news again 4 months later, when he failed to appear at 2 separate court arraignments in connection with his criminal cases. But he would never be picked up on his warrants, because he tragically passed away just days after authorities announced that they were looking for him. A witness saw Begay stumbling into the road just after midnight and tried to warn him about oncoming traffic, but he went into the road anyway and was fatally struck by a car. He was pronounced dead at the scene. 4. Darren Osmond. British couple Darren Osmond and Claire Holland were brought together by a shared drinking habit in 2008. They were both heavy boozers, and unlike many people, becoming parents failed to motivate them to cut back on their alcohol intake. After losing custody due to their lifestyle in 2010, the couple went their separate ways. 2 years later, in June 2012, Claire vanished after leaving a pub in Bristol at around 11:15 p.m. one night. She hasn't been seen since, and although her body has never been found, authorities believe she was murdered. At the time of her disappearance, she was just 32 years old. 8 years after Claire went missing, an undercover officer going by the name Paddy O'Hara befriended Darren to see if he would eventually confess to killing Claire. Believing O'Hara to be an underworld figure, Darren opened up to his new friend during conversations that were secretly tape recorded and later shared in court. Then, in 2022, authorities charged him with Claire's murder. Darren maintained his innocence and continues to do so now. But he also allegedly confessed to some level of involvement in Claire's disappearance to at least 5 people, in addition to the undercover agent, including friends, police officers, a new girlfriend, an emergency phone line operator, and a fellow inmate he befriended while being detained ahead of his trial. When the case went to trial in late 2023, the jailhouse informant testified that Darren and Claire had gotten into an argument while drinking at a park, hours after Claire was last seen leaving the pub. According to the inmate's claims, the exes got together after first getting in touch on the phone to discuss a custody-related matter. During the disagreement that broke out at the park, Claire blamed Darren for treating her badly during their relationship, while Darren pointed the finger at Claire for their parental rights being revoked. The fight became physical, with Claire taking the first strike and Darren putting his hands around her throat. When the fellow prisoner asked about the location of Claire's body, Darren allegedly said that her remains were unrecoverable and that he had knife skills, which prosecutors interpreted as a hint that the young woman had been chopped up. During a court hearing, Darren denied ever confessing to the jailhouse informant, claiming it was all lies. He admitted that he'd taken credit for Claire's disappearance with numerous other people, but blamed these confessions on him being a drunk idiot who was trying to will an explanation into existence. Darren also claimed that he was trying to make himself seem big and like something he's not. From the outside looking in, it seems entirely plausible that Darren might have lost all self-control during a drunken argument, especially given the ample amount of testimony the court has heard about his explosive temper. But without a confession or a body, questions will continue to linger regarding Claire's fate and whereabouts. So for now, Darren's criminal case appears to be ongoing. 3. Tony Haas. 35-year-old Timothy Mumbrue and his girlfriend, 23-year-old Tana Togstad, were viciously stabbed to death at Togstad's Weyerwager, Wisconsin home in March of 1992. The case quickly became a whodunit and remained unsolved for more than 3 decades. Over the years, investigators revisited the case multiple times. They retested evidence, interviewed numerous people, carried out search warrants, and collected DNA samples. Detectives eventually identified a man named Tony Haas as a potential suspect. He was 21 years old when the double murder occurred. In 2022, law enforcement stealthily obtained a sample of Haas's DNA during a traffic stop, and it turned up as a match to a sample belonging to the suspected killer. During questioning, he explained that his father had died in a snowmobile accident when he was a child, and that Tana Togstad's father was involved in the tragedy. Haas also told police that he had flashbacks in the form of snippets that caused him to fear that he was involved in the murders and had no conscious memory of it. One of these so-called snippets included a memory of vomiting near the front steps of someone's home. According to a criminal complaint, Haas explained that he got very drunk while bar hopping on the night of the crime, which caused him to reflect on the tragedy that claimed his father's life. And in his drunken stupor, he began thinking about going to Togstad's home. Then he actually did it. After supposedly being unable to remember the murders for so long, the details were now apparently coming to mind. Haas allegedly confessed to the killings and described getting in a scuffle with Mumbrue, punching Togstad unconscious and stabbing both victims. He claimed that he didn't plan to hurt anyone and was unable to explain what his motive was. And when asked about the murder weapon, Haas said he couldn't remember whether he brought the knife with him or if he obtained it at the scene. More than 30 years after the victims' lives were senselessly taken, authorities charged Haas with 2 counts of first-degree murder, which he pleaded not guilty to. As of December 2023, a trial date still hasn't been set due to numerous delays and both parties needing extra time to review evidence and prepare. The next court hearing, however, is scheduled for March of 2024. 2. Jay Webster. During a night out in Caerphilly, South Wales in April 2023, 28-year-old Jay Webster and 27-year-old Benjamin Lloyd got into an argument on the street after being denied entry into a bar for being too drunk. It was a rather trivial disagreement, but it took a serious turn when the two friends started trading blows. After taking 2 punches from Lloyd, Webster punched his buddy in the head, causing him to fall and smack his skull against the pavement. As soon as it happened, Webster began to panic. He frantically pleaded with his unresponsive buddy to get up, while telling onlookers that he didn't mean for that to happen. But much to everyone's relief, Lloyd regained consciousness. He turned down an ambulance and tried hailing a cab while Webster went to another pub and continued drinking. When Lloyd arrived home, his family noticed that he was in bad condition and urged him to get medical help, but he refused and went to bed. Later that night, Webster stopped by and apologized to Lloyd's mother for the fight that had happened between the young men hours earlier. Lloyd's father checked in on him throughout the night, but life-saving efforts failed when he found his son unresponsive the next morning. When police arrested Webster later that day, he seemed surprised to learn that Lloyd was dead, and he described his condition the previous night as 9 out of 10 drunk. Webster pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison. While delivering a victim impact statement, Lloyd's mother told Webster that she harbored no ill will toward him for her son's death and that she believed it truly was an accident. 1. Grant Bradley. While out drinking at a pub in South Gloucestershire, England, one day in June of 2022, Marcus Dunkerton punched his associate, 47-year-old Grant Bradley, in the face during a disagreement. After leaving the bar later on, Bradley retrieved a knife and walked to Dunkerton's house with a plan to settle the score. He entered the residence, where Dunkerton was asleep on the sofa, and stabbed him repeatedly while the victim's partner tried unsuccessfully to intervene. Bradley then left the scene and walked home while Dunkerton lay dying in a pool of his own blood, and sadly the victim was pronounced dead at the scene. An autopsy found that Dunkerton had 13 injuries, including 5 stab wounds. One of the wounds had severed his femoral artery, causing him to bleed out extremely fast. Soon enough, the police came knocking on Bradley's door. He claimed that it only meant to hurt Dunkerton, but that he didn't mean to kill his friend. He also tried accusing the victim's girlfriend of being involved. More specifically, Bradley told investigators that his goal was to stab Dunkerton in the buttocks, so it would be painful and uncomfortable to sit down for a while. A jury rejected Bradley's claim that he already had the knife with him when he showed up at Dunkerton's home, instead concluding that the defendant had stopped home for the weapon beforehand. In the end, Bradley was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 23 years in prison. While handing down the punishment, the judge pointed out how several people had told Bradley to cool down when the initial argument between him and Dunkerton broke out. But he let his booze and his temper get the best of him, and now he's paying a hefty price for the needless tragedy.
Number 19. Kylie Cunningham. After losing money in a pinball game at a New Jersey bowling alley in 2019, 26-year-old Kylie Cunningham allegedly threw a drunken tantrum and punched the machine. A staff member reimbursed the money the young woman lost, but told her to leave the bowling alley. According to police, Cunningham threw a cup of water at the employee's face for refusing to serve her any more alcohol. A short while later, an officer found her walking along a roadside with a man. The cop asked the pair for their IDs, but noted in a report that Cunningham refused to hand hers over, instead devolving into an enraged tirade and struggling to maintain her balance. Cunningham allegedly continued to resist and was loud and argumentative, even after backup arrived while being handcuffed and put in the back seat of a cruiser. She was accused of kicking an officer in the chest and headbutting him after a failed attempt to put her in a leg restraint. After arriving at police headquarters, she allegedly kicked another cop who was trying to place her in a holding cell. Due to Cunningham's suspected level of intoxication, the police called paramedics to the scene. She remained uncooperative and was put in a spit mask while being loaded into an ambulance, and she still somehow managed to bite an EMT. Medical responders ended up having to sedate her in order to transport her safely. Cunningham was charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault, 3 counts of simple assault, 1 count of resisting arrest, and 3 related crimes. Number 18. Gabriel Lyle Schroeder. Delta Airlines boasts some of the aviation industry's strictest alcohol policies for its employees, but this apparently wasn't enough to stop 37-year-old pilot Gabriel Lyle Schroeder from starting his workday tipsy in September 2019. According to authorities, Schroeder was waiting to get his baggage checked at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport when he noticed TSA agents conducting additional checks on crew members. When they instructed Schroeder to put his luggage on the table for inspection, he said that he wasn't ready to go through the line and swiftly walked away. Suspecting that the pilot might have a prohibited item in his bag, the agents called TSA police. Schroeder was seen entering and exiting a nearby bathroom, where officers found a 1.75-liter bottle of vodka in the garbage can. When the police caught up with Schroeder again, he was sitting in the cockpit of the aircraft he was about to co-pilot to San Diego. During a conversation with detectives, he allegedly claimed he had not consumed alcohol in 3 days and denied going into any bathrooms before getting on the plane. But he reeked of booze, according to officials, and he blew a 0.065 on the breathalyzer, which is slightly under the legal limit for driving a car and well over the 0.04 limit for pilots. Schroeder reportedly admitted that the bottle of vodka was his and confessed to drinking 3 cocktails and a can of beer at his house the night before. Schroeder pleaded guilty to attempting to operate an aircraft under the influence of alcohol and was sentenced to 30 days of mostly home confinement and at least 1 weekend in jail. After that, he was required to serve probation and attend alcohol treatment. Number 17. Kerry Gardner. Lee Collins was driving 23-year-old Kerry Gardner home from a blind date in 2013 when he stopped at a store in Leamington Spa, England to buy a pack of cigarettes. While he was inside paying, Gardner slipped into the seat of his Citroën C3, which Collins had borrowed from his father, and sped off. The young woman was extremely drunk, so it wasn't long before she clipped another vehicle and crashed into some fuel containers, totaling the car. Gardner's blood alcohol content was more than 3 times the legal limit for driving. She pleaded guilty to vehicle taking, excess alcohol, and having no license or insurance, and the judge sentenced her to a year of community supervision plus an 18-month driving ban. Number 16. Mary Jane Carpenter. Most people would agree that bars are not appropriate places for children, but a 25-year-old Iowa woman named Mary Jane Carpenter apparently felt differently based on her decision to bring her daughter to a Des Moines watering hole one afternoon in 2016. According to a police report, the young mother sat at the bar in a bikini top and shorts while the toddler ran all over the place and rolled around on the floor unsupervised. When confronted by the bartender about the obviously inappropriate situation at hand, Carpenter allegedly slammed her drink down on the counter and began swearing, then got up and left with her child. A concerned customer followed Carpenter outside, and it's a good thing he did. According to police, the young woman abandoned her kid in their stroller and ran down the street. The Good Samaritan stayed with the little girl until police arrived. Inside the stroller, officers found a half-full bottle of vodka. Carpenter allegedly blew a .183 during a breathalyzer, putting her blood alcohol content at more than twice the legal limit for driving. She was accused of slipping out of her handcuffs and fought while police tried to restrain her, striking an officer in the face and also hitting her child. After getting the combative arrestee under control, police booked her into custody on charges of child endangerment, assault on police officers, and consumption. Number 15. Chloe Haynes. During one of the many in-flight outbursts to make headlines in recent years, a 26-year-old British woman named Chloe Haynes allegedly flew into a drunk rampage during a Jet2 flight from London to Turkey in 2019. According to authorities, Haynes scratched a crew member, lunged at the passenger door in an attempt to open it, and threatened to kill everyone in the plane while crew members and passengers subdued her. The plane turned around and was escorted back to England by Royal Air Force jets. Based on the nature of the call for help, the situation was considered so serious that pilots broke the sound barrier catching up with the aircraft. Chloe was arrested and banned from the airline for life. In early 2020, she pleaded guilty to endangering the safety of an aircraft and common assault. Her lawyer said that his client became upset when a crew member asked her to sit down, and he admitted that Chloe was drunk, but also argued that she was unwell, claiming that she felt embarrassed about her behavior and failed to go any further into detail about what triggered the tantrum. The young woman reportedly sobbed throughout her hearing as the judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison. Number 14. Jocelyn Reardon. 20-year-old Jocelyn Reardon was simply trying to be a good friend when she showed up at a courthouse in Troy, Michigan one morning in 2016 to pick up 2 friends who had been charged with driving drunk and being intoxicated. But by the time she arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning, her friends had been released. An officer noticed Reardon's pickup truck near the building and approached her to see what was going on. She was only wearing an oversized t-shirt, according to the police, and her speech was slurred. After failing a field sobriety test, blowing a .133 on the breathalyzer, and admitting to drinking 4 or 5 shots, Reardon was arrested on suspicion of operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol. Dashcam footage of the conversation showed the young woman crying in the back of a police cruiser about how her friends had abandoned her. The 2 other young women who had gotten arrested earlier that night included a 23-year-old woman who was naked from the waist down and drunk behind the wheel, as well as a 19-year-old woman who was cited for underage drinking. Police Sergeant Megan Lemon told local station WXYZ that there were a lot of bad decisions that went on that night, but that law enforcement was glad that nobody got hurt. Number 13. Drunk people versus road signs. When deputies in Evansville, Indiana responded to a reported accident late one night in August 2021, they arrived to find 65-year-old Paul Whitmore trying to get into someone else's vehicle because he thought it was his. He had crashed his own car after running over a stop sign and seemed heavily intoxicated. By the time local police arrived at the scene, Whitmore was sitting on the ground. His speech was slurred and he was allegedly too drunk to stand up on his own. For his safety, the police decided not to perform field sobriety tests and instead took him straight into custody. In another instance of a drunk driver running over a sign that occurred back in 2017, 57-year-old Stephen DeWitt was accused of losing control of his Jeep along a California highway and mowing down a sign that read, "Report drunk drivers." Law enforcement described DeWitt as quite intoxicated and charged him with DUI. A similar incident happened in Batavia, Ohio on St. Patrick's Day 2023 when a drunk driver struck a sign featuring a phone number for reporting suspected impaired drivers to the State Highway Patrol. There were no reported injuries, but the driver's car sustained significant damage, and the suspect now faced the added costs of dealing with an operating while intoxicated charge. A 28-year-old impaired driver in St. Thomas, Ontario, learned the importance of obeying road signs and not driving drunk one night in May of 2023 when they drove around a road closed sign and hit a parked excavator, sending both vehicles into a 12-foot deep hole. Thankfully, nobody was injured, but the driver now had the pleasure of facing criminal charges for operation of a motor vehicle while impaired by alcohol, driving on a closed highway, and driving while using a handheld device. Number 12. Sierra Newell and Brianna LaFoe. In September 2023, police responded to a call about two women tossing a baby around like a toy and flipping him upside down outside a bar in Daytona Beach, Florida. According to witnesses, the suspects were standing about 4 feet apart and throwing the child back and forth. The women were later identified as 20-year-old Sierra Newell, who was on crutches at the time, and 19-year-old Brianna LaFoe. Bystanders told police that Newell was threatening to hit them with the baby in her arms, and that LaFoe actually did hit an onlooker who was recording the incident with their cell phone before taking one of Newell's crutches and attempting to strike them a second time. Police viewed the cell phone video, and the incident was also captured by at least one nearby surveillance camera. Sean Knapp, who manages a cannabis shop nearby, told Fox 35 Orlando that the footage on his store's security system was disturbing. He said that he was glad the child was okay, and that he believed the outcome would have been much worse if nobody stepped in. According to law enforcement, both suspects had gotten drunk at the bar they were found outside of, despite both of them being underage. Both women were charged with felony child abuse, and LaFoe faces an additional battery charge. It's unclear who the baby belongs to, but arrangements were reportedly being made shortly after the suspect's arrest to see if Newell's mother could take custody of the child. Number 11. Andrew Tosh. During a flight from Glasgow to Turkey in 2015, an unruly passenger, later identified as 34-year-old Andrew Tosh, began lashing out aggressively at the people around him. He assaulted a female flight attendant during his tirade, prompting the pilot to divert the flight to Gatwick Airport in London. Tosh was allegedly so drunk that he didn't even know what country he was in when the plane landed. After being carried out of the plane face down by responding officers, Tosh could be heard on bodycam footage saying that he thought he was in Dalaman, Turkey, the flight's original destination. After breaking the news to Tosh that the flight never reached Dalaman because of his behavior, the officers put him into a transport vehicle. During the drive, he began spitting and shouting at the cops and was placed in a spit mask. Tosh pleaded guilty to assault, threatening and abusive behavior, and being drunk on an aircraft. He was sentenced to 9 months in jail. Number 10. Extremely drunk customers meet Waffle House Wendy. In 2022, footage of a massive fight between employees and customers at a Waffle House restaurant in Austin, Texas went viral. The highlight of the video, which was captured in 2021, showed a female employee effortlessly catching a chair that a drunk patron had thrown over the counter at her. Dubbed Waffle House Wendy by social media users, her real name is Hallie Booth. During an interview with Tucker Carlson, she explained that the chaos began when a large group of 30 to 40 people entered the restaurant and sat themselves in a closed section. An employee told the customers that they needed to move, but they refused to comply and demanded service. Booth said she was the only cook working, and until then it had been a slow night. The uncooperative and rowdy group appeared to be extremely drunk or at least intoxicated, and she was struggling to keep up with their orders. In the meantime, the customers got impatient and began demanding faster service. When their behavior started getting out of hand, Booth said she told the customers to leave, Instead, they ordered her to cook their food. The situation only devolved from there, according to Booth, who described seeing a woman hurling silverware and kicking plates and food. She responded by throwing a sugar shaker at the patron, who then climbed up onto the counter. After being removed from the employee area, the irate woman threw the chair that Booth famously caught and smacked the ground in the viral video. The quick-thinking cook was kind enough not to press charges against the enraged customer. Many people praised Booth for the way she handled the altercation and for her refusal to back down, but her superiors at the Waffle House were less impressed. She was written up for throwing the sugar shaker, and when she moved to North Carolina 6 months later and applied for a job at a Waffle House there, she was told that she was blacklisted from working at the chain. Number 9. Gordon McBeth. In October 2021, 23-year-old Samantha Pullman and her fiancé, 28-year-old Daryl Gilland, moved into a rental house in Kansas City, Missouri, owned by 44-year-old Gordon McBeth. At first, the couple got along well with their new landlord, even managing to negotiate a lower rent in exchange for agreeing to help remodel the home. But the cordial relationship only lasted about a week before McBeth's behavior went completely haywire without warning. The heat didn't work in the rental, and as outdoor temperatures dropped into the 40s, the couple contacted McBeth and asked him to either fix the heat or at least bring over a space heater so they could stay warm. McBeth initially seemed happy to accommodate the request, but he arrived at the property in a fit of rage. Pullman would later tell local station KCT5 that the landlord was acting like she and Gilland were being overly burdensome by asking for a heater. This was even though he had seemed perfectly fine just a little while earlier. She said Macbeth threw some insulation at them and threatened to kill Gilland if he wasn't satisfied with it. Speaking with Mail Online, Pullman seemed confident that Macbeth was drunk when he showed up at the house. In addition to having a reputation for being an alcoholic, the irate property owner allegedly accused the couple of making him drive drunk. According to court documents, Macbeth brandished a knife and began stabbing Gilland without warning and for no apparent reason. Two neighbors overheard Gilland's anguished screams and rushed over to find Macbeth on top of the victim. They held the accused attacker at gunpoint until police arrived, while Gilland bled out from dozens of stab wounds and died in Pullman's arms. Authorities charged Macbeth with second-degree murder. Records show that he remains in custody at the Clay County Jail and has already attended a pre-sentencing hearing. His next court date is in early 2024. Number 8. Christina Chambers. 33-year-old Joseph McMullen was on a first date in Houston, Texas in April 2023 when a Porsche 911 Carrera came barreling onto the sidewalk and ran straight into him at 2:30 in the morning. The driver of the Porsche, 32-year-old Christina Chambers, had allegedly struck a curb and lost control of the vehicle, causing it to leave the roadway and hit a light pole, mowing down anything in its path along the way. McMullen died at the scene, while Chambers and her two passengers were hospitalized for injuries sustained in the crash. According to police, the woman's blood alcohol content was nearly 4 times the legal limit. Investigators suspect that she may have been driving over 100 miles per hour at the time of the accident. After receiving medical treatment, Chambers was booked into the Harris County Jail on suspicion of intoxication manslaughter. She's also one of several parties who are being targeted in a wrongful death lawsuit by the McMullen family, who are accusing 4 bars of over-serving Chambers before she got behind the wheel on the day of the crash. Chambers' husband, Xuan C., is also named as a defendant in the case. According to Houston public media, C. has filed for divorce from Chambers. The plaintiffs are arguing their case based on the state's Dram Shop Act, which allows people who sell alcohol to be held accountable for serving someone who's obviously intoxicated or a danger to others. And with a blood alcohol content as high as Christina's was, the lawsuit argues that the people who served her should have been able to tell without a doubt that she was highly intoxicated. Number 7. Sean Madden. While responding to a call about a loud argument in Palm Coast, Florida one evening in October 2023, Flagler County deputies arrived to find an irate shirtless man named Sean Madden standing in a driveway. The 40-year-old suspect allegedly began challenging the deputies to a fight as soon as they got out of their cars. Instead of fueling the fire, the deputies remained impressively calm as they tried getting Madden to talk about whatever was bothering him. One deputy asked the suspect how much he had had to drink that day, but he didn't answer the question. Madden continued acting belligerent and seemed to think law enforcement was accusing him of doing something wrong. After angrily asking what he did wrong, he said he wasn't brandishing anything and dropped his shorts to his ankles right in the middle of the neighborhood. He then asked, "Where's my weapon?" The distraught suspect quickly surrendered after that and was charged with disorderly intoxication and assault on an officer. Madden was released on a $2,000 bond and is awaiting his next court date. Number 6. Drunk at the drive-thru. In September 2023, police in Albuquerque, New Mexico received a call from a Whataburger employee about a customer who had fallen asleep in the drive-thru. The worker said the customer was slurring his words while ordering and that she noticed empty bottles of alcohol in his car when she went outside to check on him and found him asleep. She took his keys out of the ignition, and when police arrived, they weren't exactly surprised to see the man, who's a repeat offender with 3 previous DWI convictions. Identified by law enforcement as 43-year-old Alfredo Alvarez, the suspect could be seen struggling to maintain his balance during his conversation with a responding officer. At one point, he fell, taking an officer who was trying to help him stand to the ground with him. During another part of the video, he fell asleep, and the officers were unable to wake him up. The police tried several times to have a coherent conversation with Alvarez, but it was no use. After realizing that he wasn't going to comprehend anything they were saying, they took him into custody on suspicion of DWI. While searching his vehicle, officers found 8 bottles of bourbon, including some that were empty and others that were partially full. Alvarez also faces charges for having an open container and driving with a revoked license. According to the most recent available updates on the case, the judge declined to keep him in custody at the state's request and instead sent him home on an ankle monitor. According to records out of Bernalillo County, he's currently wanted on a warrant for a 5th DWI charge. Number 5. Joseph Moulton. Late one night in April 2023, a drunk man later identified as 36-year-old Joseph Moulton allegedly hopped a fence onto the property of the Naples Police Department in Florida and snuck into an unlocked cruiser where he sat and waited for workers to leave the building. From there, he stealthily made his way over to some bushes and kept watch for a few more minutes before grabbing a hose and positioning it beneath the building's front door. He flooded the entryway, enabling him to break open the front door, and went straight to the men's locker room, where he showered and helped himself to a police uniform. Altogether, Moulton took around $900 worth of clothing and gear, including a shirt, pants, a hat, and a bulletproof vest. The intruder proceeded to wander around in a towel and eventually into the women's bathroom, where he relieved himself on the floor, dumped a police radio into a toilet, and then left unnoticed. After finding Moulton's wallet in the police cruiser he had staked himself out in, police brought him in for questioning. And it suddenly made sense why a 7-Eleven clerk had called earlier that day to report a man in police clothing acting strangely. Moulton allegedly admitted to being drunk and claimed he didn't remember what he had done, and was charged with felony burglary and grand theft. Number 4. Joshua Sciano. During a night out drinking in Clay, New York in 2023, 22-year-old Madison Faltisco realized that her designated driver, 23-year-old Joshua Sciano, was in no condition to get behind the wheel. After failing to find another ride home, she began walking. Early the next morning, a passerby spotted Madison's body along the roadside and called the police. She had been struck by a vehicle and had been dead for several hours. Around 10:40 p.m. the previous night, Sciano had crashed his car into a Salvation Army thrift store sign less than a mile away from where Madison's body was found. He walked away largely unscathed after having his car burst into flames and hadn't mentioned anything about an accident involving Madison. But given the proximity of the two accidents and other factors, police were pretty confident that Sciano was responsible for his friend's death. During questioning, Sciano insisted he didn't remember hitting Madison. It's certainly possible, considering his blood alcohol content was more than 5 times the legal limit at 0.43. Either way, it won't affect the state's ability to prosecute the case, according to District Attorney Bill Fitzpatrick, who told CNY Central that the suspect can say whatever he wants or not say whatever he wants. Sciano is charged with vehicular manslaughter, second-degree vehicular manslaughter, and leaving the scene of a fatal vehicle accident. Number 3. Timothy Welsh. When an extremely intoxicated man entered a gas station in Riviera Beach, Florida one afternoon and grabbed a can of beer out of the cooler, the owner tried to stop him. He pushed his way past and approached the cashier, who refused to sell the beer. The enraged customer smashed the can against the ground, causing beer to spray everywhere, and began making his way toward the exit, while the store owner followed to make sure he left. On his way out, he allegedly turned around, pulled a knife from his waistband, and pointed it toward the owner before walking away. Unconvinced that the situation was over, the owner promptly locked the door. Moments later, the raging drunk customer was back, pounding on the outside of the door with his fists. While searching the suspect, responding officers found the knife along with 8 grams of marijuana. They arrested 47-year-old Timothy Welsh on suspicion of aggravated battery with a deadly weapon and simple battery. Number 2. Higinio Salgado. After finishing up their workday one evening in April 2023, 31-year-old Higinio Soriano Salgado and his boss, architect Graham Downs, held an impromptu workplace happy hour with several other employees at their office in San Diego. Later that night, the group went to a bar where Salgado began to act noticeably loud and drunk. The bartender cut him off, but he continued drinking after the crew continued on to Downs' house. Members of the group would later say that Salgado's behavior started making them uncomfortable. He allegedly antagonized his boss's dog, made rude comments to people, followed 2 women upstairs, and opened the bathroom door while one of them was on the toilet. Salgado also became somewhat volatile, raising his voice and acting irrationally angry when he heard that Downs had recently met with someone he disliked. He warned Downs not to give the other person his job, which Downs reassured him he had no plans of doing. At the end of the night, Salgado was the only remaining guest present. Downs had asked other guests to drive Salgado home, but they refused. A little while later, a neighbor awoke to loud voices outside. According to the neighbor, Salgado was screaming at Downs, who looked like he was trying to de-escalate the situation. As the noise continued, the neighbor ran outside to get a better look at what was happening. He described seeing Salgado hovered over Downs, who was laying on the ground, and repeatedly striking his head and upper body. The witness later testified that he could hear a gurgling sound coming out of Downs' mouth as the victim lay motionless. Downs would succumb to his injuries 2 days later in the hospital. Salgado appeared to be asleep next to his dying friend when police arrived, but he was reportedly functional enough to stand up and answer the officers' questions. Following the victim's death, he was charged with first-degree murder. The defense argued for a reduced manslaughter charge, claiming that Salgado was blackout drunk and didn't remember anything past the point when he and his co-workers arrived at Downs' house, and that he therefore had no control over his behavior. Prosecutors did not disagree that Salgado was drunk, but they maintained that he was lucid enough to take responsibility for his actions. The jury convicted the defendant of second-degree murder, and the judge denied the defense's request for a probation sentence. He described the crime as one of the most senseless killings the court has ever seen, and he made it clear that he would not allow alcohol to be used as an excuse for murder in his courtroom. Salgado was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Records indicate that he was granted parole in August 2023, but that he remains in custody for now. Number 1. Lester Hui. In 2016, a night of bad decisions at London's exclusive Aspinall's Curzon Street casino left British businessman Lester Hui 6 figures in the hole, and he fought tooth and nail to avoid paying the debt. As a high roller who routinely dropped large amounts of money gambling, Hui was a VIP member of the casino. On the night in question, he was celebrating the Chinese New Year with other guests. The liquor was flowing, and Hui gambled away £400,000 in just 20 minutes. By the end of the night, he had lost another £200,000, amounting to an eye-watering £600,000 total. It's a lot of money, even for a wealthy person. And when a check that Hui signed over to the casino bounced, he decided to just not pay the debt. He still hadn't forked over a single penny when Aspinall sued him more than 3 years later. In court, Hui accused employees of getting him blackout drunk. More specifically, he claimed that he drank 3.5 bottles of champagne and wine and at least 5 shots of 54% proof firewater Motai liquor. What's more, Hui pointed the finger specifically at one of the casino's high-ranking executives, who he accused of ordering the bottle of Motai during a drinking and gambling game. He even went as far as saying that the executive lured him back to the gambling table after he had decided to call it a night. We further argued that the casino failed to stop him from gambling past a self-imposed limit of £30,000 and that he was clearly not in a condition to continue playing. Casino officials vehemently denied plying Hui with liquor and accused him of exaggerating the amount of alcohol he drank. They claimed that Hui was nowhere near blackout drunk, especially since he managed to drive 20 miles home. Furthermore, the club insisted that it was against its ethics to encourage noticeably drunk people to gamble. The judge was highly suspicious of Hui's story. He questioned how the businessman drank as much alcohol as he claimed without ending up in the hospital. Hui argued that as a nightclub owner, he drank often, implying that he was no doubt wasted, but not dangerously due to his tolerance for alcohol. In August 2023, the judge ruled that Hui is responsible for paying the debt. While it's impossible to know the extent to which alcohol influenced him that night, the court determined that he wasn't bad off enough to evade responsibility for his decisions.
10. Destiny Mary Burns. A woman in Roswell, New Mexico was quick to tell a police officer that she only had 2 beers before getting behind the wheel when she was pulled over in May of 2023. There was considerable damage to the front end of the car, but the driver, later identified as 22-year-old Destiny Mary Burns, was apparently unaware of it until she saw the officer shining a flashlight at it to get a better look. She failed to give detailed answers when asked about the circumstances of the fender bender. When she was questioned for a second time about how much she had to drink that evening, Burns said that she only had 3 beers, even though she'd claimed just minutes earlier that she'd drunk 2 beers. She then changed her answer to 3 beers, maybe 4. The young woman said she was coming from a friend's house at the time of the accident and blamed the crash on her failure to wear her glasses. When a person thinks they're in trouble with the police, it's often a good idea to say as little as possible. But Burns did the exact opposite. Even before officers arrested her or conducted a field sobriety test, she asked for permission to call her roommate and said that she knew she was going to jail. To her credit, she remained cooperative throughout most of the interaction, although the police appeared to become annoyed by her repeated requests to call her mom and her roommate. In the end, she performed poorly on a field sobriety test and was taken into custody on suspicion of aggravated DUI. 9. Stephanie Angelica Vasquez. Just days before she was scheduled to appear in court for a DUI charge in 2020, a young mother fatally crashed her Toyota Supra in Gaithersburg, Maryland. 25-year-old Stephanie Angelica Vasquez had just posted several videos of herself on social media, including one bearing the ominous caption, "I'ma kill it on the highway," when she collided with a Honda sedan at a high rate of speed. Vasquez and her passenger died from their injuries and were pronounced dead at the scene. The Honda driver and his 2 passengers were taken to the hospital with serious injuries. Both cars were completely destroyed, with the Honda nearly ripped in 2, and the Toyota crushed beyond recognition. Just weeks earlier, Vasquez had been pulled over at 1:30 a.m. for driving recklessly. She failed a field sobriety test and was arrested on suspicion of DUI and 2 gun charges. Her trial was set to begin 2 days after the fatal wreck that claimed her life. Investigators believe that Vasquez was speeding at the time of the crash, but didn't mention whether they suspected alcohol of being involved. 8. Daniela Lace. In a shocking act of destruction that left multiple families traumatized and homeless, a Canadian woman named Daniela Lace crashed her Ford Fusion into a house while driving drunk in August 2019. The 23-year-old was on her way home from a Marilyn Manson concert and was traveling in the wrong direction on a residential street when she struck the home in London, Ontario. Emergency responders discovered a ruptured gas line and rushed to pull the young woman from her car while clearing nearby residents from the area. 15 minutes after the collision, the neighborhood was rocked by a massive explosion that sent debris flying more than 650 feet or 200 meters from the crash site. 4 houses were destroyed, and 30 other homes were damaged by the blast, which was captured by a security camera from a nearby residence. The explosion left an estimated $10 million of damage in its wake. 7 people were injured, including 2 police officers and 2 firefighters. And in addition, 70 families were evacuated from their homes until it was deemed safe for them to return. Lace pleaded guilty to 4 counts of impaired driving causing bodily harm and received a 3-year prison sentence. She was also sued by at least 6 parties for the damages caused by the explosion. In early 2023, Lace sued the company responsible for serving alcohol at the concert venue, alleging that its employees had knowingly overserved her and failed to stop her from driving drunk. The lawsuit claims that the staff members either knew or should have known that Lace was intoxicated and accused the company's bouncers of failing to adequately monitor concertgoers for signs of intoxication. Lace argued that the venue is partially responsible for the wreck and should therefore be required to help cover any damages that are awarded in the lawsuits against her. 7. Lydia Couto Ramos. A typical day in the town of Rehoboth, Massachusetts, took an alarming turn one day in April 2008 when a Nissan SUV crashed into the side of a Saab sedan, which in turn struck a Honda Pilot. The accident occurred at an intersection after 30-year-old Lydia Couto Ramos allegedly ignored a stop sign. Thankfully, though, the parties involved suffered only minor injuries. Witnesses told police that Ramos exited her SUV naked and collected pieces of a license plate off the road before getting back into the vehicle and attempting to flee the scene. Responding officers arrived at the site of the crash to find the unclothed woman sitting in the SUV with the door open and a man standing beside her with a bag full of women's clothing in his arms. He identified himself as Ramos's partner, Joseph Sandbigler, and told law enforcement that the two were together prior to the accident. Ramos had reportedly kicked him out of her vehicle during an argument while parked in a secluded area for some alone time. According to police, Sandbigler repeatedly ignored commands not to interfere with the scene. He was booked into custody on an assault charge after allegedly banging his chest against a responding officer. The transporting officer later claimed that Ramos apologized for his behavior and admitted that he and Ramos had been drinking. Ramos was also accused of being uncooperative toward police as well as paramedics. Police said that when they asked her for her driver's license and told her she'd been involved in an accident, she acted confused, stating, "What accident? What are you talking about?" She allegedly refused field sobriety tests and a breathalyzer while showing multiple signs of intoxication and was arrested on suspicion of driving drunk. 6. Jessica Davies. Visitors at a popular park in Cardiff, Wales were shocked when their peaceful morning was interrupted by an out-of-control drunk driver one day in August 2012. 33-year-old Jessica Davies veered off a nearby road, then crossed a pedestrian path and drove through a picnic area before crashing her car into a lake. A bystander rushed over to help as Davies' car began to sink in 10 feet of water, but she allegedly tried to refuse his assistance. And after being pulled from the vehicle, she yelled that she'd drunk 2 bottles of wine and wanted to get back in her car. Davies told police that she didn't remember driving into the lake, but she eventually admitted that her actions could have killed someone and apologized for causing a scene. Police arrested Davies on suspicion of driving drunk. She ultimately pleaded guilty to dangerous driving and driving under the influence of alcohol. Davies' lawyer told the court that his client turned to alcohol to cope with problems in her personal life. The car accident came amid a years-long downward spiral and hopefully served as a much-needed wake-up call to get her life in order. 5. Yakerli Diaz Castro. A police officer in Chesapeake, Virginia, was seriously injured one morning in 2023 when a passing vehicle struck him during a routine traffic stop at 2:30 a.m. He was walking over to the car he'd pulled over when 30-year-old Yakerli Diaz Castro allegedly slammed into the officer and his patrol vehicle, sending him over a guardrail. The cop was hospitalized with a fractured skull and vertebrae, while other members of law enforcement took over the scene. 2 other parties were also taken to the hospital with minor injuries. According to court documents, police observed multiple empty beer cans on the floor of Diaz-Castro's car and noticed an odor of alcohol on the suspect's breath. She was charged with 1 felony count of maiming another while driving under the influence, and received misdemeanor counts of driving without a license and failing to move over for a stationary vehicle with warning lights. The case appears to be ongoing, though, so we'll have to wait and see how things play out in court. 4. Susanna Smith. A woman from Long Island, New York, is facing a manslaughter charge for allegedly causing the death of a motorcycle rider in June of 2022, according to the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. 22-year-old Susanna Smith was drunk and texting behind the wheel shortly before midnight when she struck a utility pole in the village of Seacliff, landing her car on its side. The force of the collision caused a power outage in the area and scattered wires across the road. Smith was still trapped in her car a few minutes later when 34-year-old Milton Diaz struck at least one of the downed cables while passing through on his motorcycle. He fell off the bike and, unfortunately, he died at the scene. Emergency responders helped Smith out of her vehicle and took her to a nearby hospital where she was treated for minor injuries. Then, in May of 2023, nearly a year after the accident, she was indicted on a long list of charges, including manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter, assault, driving while intoxicated, reckless endangerment, and reckless driving. Smith ended up pleading not guilty, and the case appears to be ongoing. But if convicted of the most serious charge, she could face 5 to 15 years in prison. 3. Laura Chiampa Buckley. When her friend failed to show up at a pub in the Isle of Wight for a planned meeting in 2018, 29-year-old Laura Chiampa Buckley stayed and had a few drinks anyway, with plans to walk home. It would have taken her about 25 minutes to reach her house on foot, but she drank more than planned and overestimated her ability to drive. She came to regret the decision after driving her Volkswagen Beetle off a cliff and plunging 30 feet before landing in some bushes. Emergency responders arrived at the scene expecting the worst and were shocked to discover that Chiampa Buckley had survived with only minor injuries. She was allegedly so drunk that she didn't remember getting behind the wheel or plowing through the guardrail. According to investigators, she had more than 2.5 times the legal limit of alcohol in her blood at the time of the crash. Chiampa Buckley admitted to 1 count of drunk driving and was banned from driving for 2 years. She was also fined and was ordered to perform community service. During her sentencing hearing, her lawyer reassured the court that she didn't have a habit of driving drunk or recklessly, suggesting that it was a one-time mistake that she has no plans to repeat. 2. Chelsea Standage. 19-year-old Chelsea Standage was going more than twice the speed limit when she crashed into a wall in West Yorkshire, England in November 2021. She lost control of her car during the early morning hours while going around a curve at 70 miles per hour, 113 kilometers per hour in a 30 mile per hour, 48 kilometer per hour zone, which resulted in the death of her 20-year-old boyfriend, Elliot Lem. A terrified female passenger could be heard begging Standage to slow down in videos that were posted to social media shortly before the collision. But instead of heeding her friend's advice, Standage told the young woman to F off, and sarcastically remarked that she was only going 80 miles per hour, 129 kilometers per hour. The scared passenger could be heard saying, "I'm serious, slow down." But Standage laughed at her and continued speeding. A bottle of Stella Artois could be seen sitting on the dashboard in one of the clips, and footage from several home security cameras showed the car flying through residential areas during the 2 o'clock a.m. joyride. The crash came after a day of heavy drinking and cocaine use, according to authorities, who accused the group of downing hard cider, Jaeger bombs, beer, and vodka before the crash. Standage had more than twice the legal limit of alcohol in her system, and a blood test confirmed that she'd also been using drugs. She was arrested in connection with Lamb's death and for injuries to surviving passengers. She ultimately pleaded guilty to death by dangerous driving and 2 counts of causing serious injury by dangerous driving. And as a consequence, the court sentenced the young woman to 8 years and 8 months in prison for the horrific tragedy, which Lem's mother said she'll never forgive Standage for. 1. Jenny Ubrick. In early 2020, police responded to a single vehicle car crash at a cemetery in Bethlehem, New York during the early morning hours. They arrived at around 3:00 a.m. to find a young woman trapped in her car, which had struck a telephone pole and a concrete pillar before veering into the graveyard and rolling over. The vehicle also crashed into several gravestones before coming to a stop. Emergency responders extracted 19-year-old Jenny Ubrick from the car and treated her at the scene before taking her to a nearby hospital. Thankfully, though, her injuries were non-life-threatening. Harrowing photos of the scene, captured by local photographer Thomas Mara, suggest that the outcome of the accident could have been much worse. The roof of Ubrick's car had been ripped off in the wreck and was laying near the rest of the vehicle, which had been crushed and crumpled like a soda can. After everything, Ubrick was issued traffic citations for driving while intoxicated and failing to use the designated lane. And shortly after the crash, authorities said that they were investigating to determine whether to press additional charges for damage to the cemetery and headstones. However, the outcome of the case is unclear. If a close friend asked you to bail them out of jail on a DUI charge after acting extremely rude and belligerent toward you before their arrest, and you knew that they had nobody else to call, would you help them out, or would you let them sit in jail and reflect on their actions? Let us know what you think in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.